Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We are going to spend some time in this first hour as we broadcast solely in the state of Texas to focus on some very important Texas races. And this is one of the things we really enjoy about this new opportunity we have with our local radio station. So often in the past, we've had to make everything national, and certainly a lot of politics is state and local. So I think you're really going to enjoy our conversation today. I am surrounded by some very smart and successful women who all won their primaries and will be running, of course, in the general election. Let me first of all introduce Angela Paxton. I would imagine you would know her because of all the television commercials, but again, the Senate race in the 8th District there, the Texas Senate race. And Angela, of course, you are an educator, an individual that has been involved in public, private, and homeschooling for 22 years. Of course, many people know your husband. He's been in studio with us as well. And so welcome to the program.
Well, thanks so much. And I actually bring greetings from the Attorney General. Hello to all you guys and all of the listeners this morning.
We're going to have to get him in a lot more than now that we can focus on the state of Texas. Usually we get him in only when it's a national issue, when he and other attorney generals are suing. And this is going to be just a great opportunity. So we're so grateful for having the local station. Lisa Luby Ryan has also been in the studio with us before, and she is an individual that won her race in the House District 114 and is also involved still as an interior designer. So you spend a fair amount of your time doing design and running a business, and then out there campaigning as well, don't you?
I do. Thank you, Kerby, for having me, and excited, Angela and Candy, to be with you all today. And so I'm trying to find the balance.
That's tough.
It is tough.
I do not know how you do it.
It's working so far.
Yes. Well, and Candy Noble is joining us for the first time in studio. But again, I've been following her race because just across Greenville is where her district is. I couldn't vote for her, but did support her in District 89. And again, I've known her and her family. I hate to admit it, we've known each other now for decades, haven't we?
That's true. What an honor it was to have your support, and what an honor to be here today.
Well, let's, if we can, get into the campaign for just a few minutes, and we're going to look at ahead. But I always kind of like to look in the rearview mirror, and maybe we could talk about some of these campaigns. And Lisa, let me come to you first. Lisa Luby Ryan, you are running not only against a fairly well-known individual, but an incumbent. And I think they did a study years ago in which they said that individuals who are incumbents have a greater re-election percentage than some of the people that used to run for the Politburo in Russia. So when you first started saying and telling people I'm running against an incumbent, there must have been a few people that wondered about that. What happened?
Well, they thought I was crazy. You know, I didn't seek to run for this office. I had many people come to me wanting a change of leadership. And after much prayer and counsel with my family and friends and inner circle, confidants, we decided to do it. And, you know, Kerby, every day we knocked doors. I personally knocked on almost 5,000 doors, telling our story and telling people what I believed in and what I stood for. And as an entrepreneur who owns 5 businesses in Dallas, a mom who's raised 2 amazing boys here, and the involvement in the Republican Party and in civic activities and boards, my name was wide and deep, and people know me and what I stand for. And I think the Trump election, it awakened the giant, and people are ready for change. They wanted integrity, they wanted transparency, and they wanted someone to come to the door and say, I believe in you more than I believe in the bureaucrats in Austin or in D.C. And our story resonated. And I'll tell you the other thing we did that I think made a huge difference. I handed out 12,000 households my personal cell number to voters, because if they're going to vote for me, I want them to know me and I want to know them and I want them to call me. And I think that made a difference, being accessible, because I told them, I'm not interested in being your politician. I'm interested in serving you and being your representative. And here's my number, and this is how you can get in touch with me. So it has been, I'm still giddy.
Yes.
I'm still pinching myself.
Isn't that amazing?
But it shows what hard work. And when you're passionate about something and you believe in what you're doing, because as we were talking earlier, if I didn't think I could take my leadership skills, my business knowledge, and go down and make a difference, I wouldn't have done it, because it is a sacrifice. But you know what? The reward is worth the sacrifice. And I'm just excited and humbled and ready to serve.
I would think so. We talked about House District 114. How about House District 89? Because in some respects, both of you running for representative districts and not necessarily having TV ads, which we'll talk about in just a minute, had to wear out a lot of shoe leather. And Candy, I know that's exactly what you did.
We did. We had some amazing volunteers that helped as well, but we knocked on almost 7,000 doors, and it is just amazing to get to meet the people that you want to represent, to get to hear what's important to them, and their issues are real and deep, and their needs are real, and they want someone to hear that. As Lisa said, they want someone to reflect that in Austin when policies are made, when it comes to their children, their grandchildren. They want to know that somebody's got their back and that you're not going to take Texas off in a way that does not keep Texas strong.
And again, one of the things that many people that know you know that you've been, for example, on the state Republican Executive Committee, but people in District 89, they just might know this individual that you ran against, who had probably more visibility than you did, didn't he?
Yeah, he had been a justice of the peace for many years in the area, and at least part of the district. And so I had to start kind of from zero on name recognition. Loved my big red signs that went out early and stayed up. And I had a big honor of having been endorsed not just by Kerby Anderson, but by the governor. And we were able to put that on our signs, and I think that helped as well with name recognition.
Angela, let me come to you, because everybody knows your race. Wasn't it the most expensive Texas Senate race in history?
It's up there in the in the annals of history now, right? We knew that it would probably be expensive, but it certainly exceeded everyone's expectations.
Yes. Well, and again, these two individuals had to walk a lot. You certainly did as well. But a lot of this battle was just fought out on television and on the Internet. I was amazed at the number of Internet ads that would pop up between, you and your opponent. And so, again, all three of you had something in common, and that is you were actually going against somebody that had some pretty good visibility, right?
It's true. And, of course, my opponent got in the race about 6 months before I did. I'm a little bit like Lisa's race. It wasn't something that I had set out to do on my own initiative, really. It was a situation where in August, the person that my husband and I and most of the folks that I knew were supporting actually stepped out of the race.
Yes.
And so that was when I started getting phone calls from folks asking me if I would please consider running. And I think, what they were interested in was not just someone who was conservative, but they wanted someone who cared about representing them.
Right.
And that was a major difference between my opponent and me. He moved into the district to run, and I'd lived here for 21 years.
Right. You lived in McKinney. We need to take a break, and when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about what this legislative session might look like. I know I don't want to jinx it, but let's assume all three of you win your general election and you are then serving in Austin. We've got a lot of things to talk about, and I want to get some of your comments about that. But if you would like to ask a question, you can do so. Of course, you could give us a call, 800-351-1212, but I know most of you just simply like to watch us on the YouTube live channel. Or, of course, you can also send us an email, and we'll send some of those questions on as well. I've got a whole list, so I don't need any more. But if you want to ask a question or make a comment, feel free to do so. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
No doubt you've heard the phrase politics is downstream from culture. It is a way of explaining that what is at stake in our world often begins upstream in the culture. Popular culture is all around us and delivered to us through broadcast media and social media. We perceive the world through news reports, through movies, through entertainment programs, and through music. Every form of communication has a message. Sometimes it's blatant and intentional. Often it is subtle and not even perceived by the artist, actor, musician, or broadcaster. He or she may simply be telling a story, but that story comes from a worldview perspective. A wise and discerning Christian should frequently ask, what message is being delivered? Is the viewpoint true or false? How does it line up with biblical principles? Well, let's face it, many of us merely accept what we read, see, and hear uncritically. And that brings us to politics. We are bombarded by messages every day. Most Americans watch lots of television, listen to a fair amount of music, and visit various websites. Unless they are approaching all of the entertainment with lots of discernment, they'll begin to accept the worldview perspective of the writer, the actor, the director, the musician who controls the story and the perspective. Most of these stories come from a liberal, secular viewpoint that often becomes easier to embrace. If someone stood up and lectured to you about abortion, homosexuality, gender identity, your guard would be up. But if the stories portray liberals, feminists, and gays in a positive light, they get into our head and emotions. And if they portray conservatives and Christians in a negative light, the same thing happens. All this to say that we need to pay attention to popular culture because politics is downstream from culture. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Hello, I'm Chuck Bentley, CEO of Crown Financial Ministries. I so appreciate the great work of Kerby Anderson and the Point of View team. Every day they step into the public arena to make a stand for truth by shedding biblical light on the issues that confront us all. Never backing away or compromising on the truth, they're making a difference for you, for me, and the next generation. It's important that we Christians put our money behind those causes that are having a meaningful impact. My wife and I personally support Point of View, and we encourage you to do the same.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Last week we had our Truth Team Week, and we were able to raise some financial support. And, of course, we just had a chance a moment ago here to hear from Chuck Bentley, who actually is part of Crown Financial, an organization originally started by Larry Burkett and Howard Dayton and others, and has certainly wanted to encourage you to consider what you might do to support this ministry. I understand that we still have some money left over from our match, about $5,500, which means if you wanted to make a gift of $100, it becomes $200, or if you wanted to join the Truth Team at $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year, that would be $720. So again, feel free to visit the website, click on that button that says Truth Team, and you'll know a little bit more. In studio with us today, we have Candy Noble, Angela Paxton, and Lisa Luby Ryan. And Candy, let me come to you for just a minute because we have women here. But there's this idea that a woman should support so-called women's issues, and that's been defined by a lot of progressives as, well, reproductive rights and gender equality and gender pay equity and all sorts of other issues, support of Planned Parenthood. I know you disagree with that, so how do you respond to people that say, you're a woman, you should support so-called women's issues?
it's funny that you should ask that. As I was poll greeting during early voting, it was one rainy day, and I was under my umbrella, and a man climbed under my umbrella, actually held my umbrella above my hand, and told me I should be ashamed of myself for being a woman and a Republican. And I proceeded to tell him what I'm going to tell you today is I am proud to be a Republican woman, because we are for women from the moment of conception, that we know that women don't need government to interfere with them to be successful. As the mom of 3 daughters, I'm very proud of their success as women, and they don't need government intruding into their lives in order to be successful. They are successful because they work hard and they're smart women. And that's the message of Republicans, is that we like the opportunity to do well in the free enterprise system, and we do well, as Lisa does, in the free enterprise system.
Lisa, let's come to you, because a very successful individual in interior decorating and all the things that you do in interior design. People would say, she's got to be a Democrat, right? You know, you got to have supported these kinds of ideas because you're a successful woman, and the Republicans are known for keeping women down. How do you respond to that?
Well, I couldn't do what I do if I was a Democrat. You know, I want the government as far away from me and my businesses as they can. That's not their role to be in our business. You know, the regulations, they put regulations on the interior design business. I'm for less regulations. Let people do what they were created to do. They will work. It's in us to work hard, and the government just needs to get out of our way and let us do that. And it's interesting. I spoke to the Young Conservatives of Texas convention here on Saturday, and one of the young girls asked a question, and she said, what do you think when the former presidential candidate says that we only voted the way we were told to vote? And I said, I hope you were offended. And she said, yes, we were. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, first of all, you have to know desperate people say desperate things, which Hillary did. But these girls, they love being independent. It empowers them. They're educated. They find the information out for themselves. So, you know what? I am 100% pro-women. No one's helped me along the way. I've done it. I've rolled up my sleeves like these other 2 women here. And we're going to go fight for women. We're going to lead women. We're going to lead the way and champion for women and let them know that in Texas, women, you can be anything you want to be.
Yes. Again, if you know these women around the table, it's hard to believe that their boss or their husband told them how to vote. But nevertheless, that's one of those kinds of ideas that didn't make a lot of sense to most of us that know those of you that are very sharp and articulate women. But how do you respond to that, Angela? Because, again, you're going to hear that when you go to Austin. I know others have heard that before, just the idea that women are supposed to support the so-called women's issues.
Well, it is an interesting thing. And, you know, I think the first thing that I go back to is I grew up in a world where I really didn't first think of myself by gender. I thought of myself as a human being made by God, made in the image of God. I grew up in the church. I had parents, grandparents that encouraged me to do whatever I wanted to do. You know, I grew up in a generation where the sky was the limit. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to go back to a mentality that says you're a woman first, mm-hmm. and here's what you can do. Here's how you have to think. If you ask me, it's the left that's telling women how they have to think and how they have to vote. But I couldn't agree more with these 2 ladies, and in particular, Candy, the comment that you made about life. And of course, many people know my story as an adopted child.
That's right.
And, you know, I think the very first right that every woman ought to have is the right to be born. And there is a reason that the Declaration of Independence says that we are endowed by our Creator, not by government, but by our Creator, with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's a reason life is listed first. Mm-hmm. And I am so excited and eager about the opportunity to stand for that as an adopted child with my personal story, to make a difference for women to come in the arena of life.
Excellent. You know, one of the things that we've talked about so often in the national level is that you have good legislation in the House of Representatives that goes to the U.S. Senate to die. But in Texas, it's just the reverse. You have really good legislation in the Texas Senate that goes to the House to die. Lisa, talk about this for just a minute. Can we change that? Obviously, we're going to have a different Speaker of the House. Have you thought about what that's going to entail so that when you get some great legislation from Angela and the Lieutenant Governor and people like that, it doesn't just sit there and die in the House of the Texas House, I should say?
No, I think that's great. And I'm looking forward. I love that Angela's going to go lead the way for us and go down there. But I think that I'm personally going to look at legislation that excuse me, is good for all Texans, not just a few. Mm-hmm. And I think that if we can there's an amazing slate of candidates, and if we can get these candidates in Austin in November, the legislation can do some great things for Texas. Because, so goes Texas, so does America.
That's right.
Goes America. And so I'm just excited about it. I think there's some great issues coming up. There's some unresolved issues from last session that need to be addressed, but I think there's a lot of good on the horizon for Texas, and I'm just excited to be a part of it.
Candy, you'll be a representative, and again, you've seen, as you've been in Austin many times before, great legislation makes it over and then never even gets out of committee in the House.
It's been frustrating to watch as someone that goes down and lobbies for good legislation, to watch bipartisan bills that have, 90 co-sponsors not even get a hearing because the speaker didn't like it, him alone, and he would refer it to a committee for it to die. And that is not representative of a good representative republic, which is what we have. There's 150 members, not one. And so I'm excited about electing, and I know Lisa is too, about electing a new speaker, someone that will be fair with legislation and let it be heard by committees and then be heard by the full body and voted on. I'm very optimistic about who that new speaker might be, and hopefully someone that's very fair when it comes to letting legislation be heard.
Let's take a break. When we come back, I know I have some former teachers here. I want to talk about education because we've got some of you that have certainly thought about that and what we can do. And again, if you have any comments, of course, you can be watching us on Facebook Live, or of course, you can also watch it on our website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to know about any one of these candidates and find their websites, we will mention that at the end, but we also have that linked there as well. And just as we go to the break, let me just mention that we just finished off our Truth Team Week last week. But if you would still like to join with us, we have some of that match money still on the table. And for as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, you can certainly be a Truth Team member. We've also encouraged some of you, if you wanted to join at a higher level, which is $45 a month. Why $45? Well, Marlon Maddox started the show back in 1972, so we've been on air for more than 45 years. We also include not only the Bible Stick, but also these booklets and all sorts of other resources. So if you'd like to know a little bit more, you can go to the website, pointofview.net. Of course, you can call our pledge line at any point, 800-347-5151, and we'll continue our conversation with Angela Paxton, Lisa Luby Ryan, and Candy Noble right after these important messages.
One minute. Give me 1 minute here for two very important points. First, Point of View listeners have worked and prayed for a long time, and a number of cultural victories appear to be within reach. Last week was huge. Many joined the Truth Team to be the change America needs to help finish these battles. If you gave, thank you. Thank you very much. And second, if you did not step up yet, you still have a chance to do something powerful. Last week, we received a $46,000 challenge gift that doubled gifts up to the total. We ended the week just short of that goal. But the donor now agreed to a brief extension. But listen, we don't get the match until we pass the finish line. Help us complete the challenge. Visit today at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. You can be the difference. Push us across the line. Step up now, 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, Lisa Luby Ryan with us, Candy Noble and Angela Paxton. We're going to spend some time talking about education. Of course, 4 children, 3 children, 2 children. 5 grandchildren, right? And
we have
more on the
three
way.
more
Three
on the way.
3 on the way.
Yeah.
So when we talk about kids and you talk about education, everybody's all in. Plus, we got a couple of teachers, former teachers here. So, Angela, start us off. You've been a math teacher, and you've been involved in education. I think I have down here 22 years in one way or another. Go
22 years. I I was certified to teach in Texas. My undergraduate was in mathematical science. It was a math computer science degree from Baylor. Went back to school and got certified to teach. Did my master's in education at the University of Houston in Clear Lake. And then began my career teaching high school math and physics and whatever else they sent my way in public school. When our children were born, we actually homeschooled our kids for up through early elementary. And then I went back to the teaching profession when our kids were all school age. And I taught at a private Christian school up in the Frisco area, Legacy Christian Academy.
That's right.
All 4 of our kids graduated from there. We were there for almost 12 years.
Yes.
And, I guess there's really no one in the Senate that has a background in public, private, and homeschooling.
You're it.
As an instructor myself, and then also as a parent. But of course, education is something that we all care about in Texas. Parents are a very large part of our population. Obviously, we spend 52% of our general revenues on education. And it's a little surprising in a certain sense that we don't have educators in the Senate or really many in the House, someone with a boots on the ground sort of perspective for how we spend that money. But at the same time, it's not so surprising because as an educator, you're really not in a position to take off the spring semester every other year to go down and work on legislation. But I'm thrilled to have the opportunity and the background to bring to such an important topic in Texas.
Well, you got the State Board of Education, you got TEKS, you got tests, you got all sorts of things, you got curriculum. And so I think you'll bring just a lot to the table that has been needed for some time, especially in the Senate. Lisa, let me come to you for just a minute. Lisa Luby Ryan. And again, you'll be in the House, Texas House, at least that's what we're assuming will take place. And there are still some things that can be done even in legislation to help education, right?
There is. And that was one of the number one things that we heard when we went to the door, knocking on doors. And what can we do to change our school system? And my district is completely different. On the west, they all go to private schools.
That's true.
And on the east, they're all Lake Highlands. And they are very involved in their public schools. So I have 2 different voices in my district. But my commitment to them was I am pro-education. We are going to go down there. I think what we need to do is look at how we get money into the classrooms. We have got to get the money to the classrooms so the kids learn. There's a lot of money, as Angela says, 52% of the revenue goes to education, but we're not educating our children like we as the state of Texas should be. And so I'm excited. I'd love to serve on an education committee. And, I have a special needs child, an autistic child.
Yes.
So we've been
bring that up. Yeah.
in the public school system and we've been in the private school system. But as a parent, and this is one of my things at the door, is I believe no one knows what's best for their child or wants best for their child than a parent. And as having an autistic son, we championed for him. He graduated high school. He went on to Abilene Christian University, graduated in 5 years, which most kids without learning differences don't do these days. He works on his own. He has a job. He lives on his own. And that's because we don't say, I can't, I won't, or why me. But we've got to get parents and children understanding that knowledge and education is what will set them apart from everybody else. And can I just add one thing for the record? That's Candy that has 5 grandchildren, not me or Angela. Yeah. We're going to give those grandchildren to you, Candy.
I love them.
Absolutely.
I'm keeping them.
And she's taking care of 2 of them right now, right?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Angel.
I wanted to hop on to something that Lisa mentioned. What we know from research on achievement, student achievement, is that the 2 most significant factors are engaged parents and great teachers. And so, she's talking about the essence of what makes education happen, what drives student achievement. And we've got to get the dollars to the classroom. And primarily what that means is we've got to get those dollars to teacher salaries, really, so that we're attracting, retaining, helping with professional development, great classroom teachers who are going to make a difference and help the kids learn.
Well, I'm sorry, Kerby, because what's happening and what we're seeing is these teachers are not making a lot of money. They have a lot of responsibility.
Yes, they do.
And yet they're being asked to, out of your salary, bring snacks to your kids.
Yes.
Buy school supplies for your bulletin boards. You know, when there's so many things, simple, easy changes that can be made in educating these kids. It's simple little things just to start. But I'm excited. I think we can, and I think women are important, having them, just as you said, as teachers and moms.
You know, Bill Bennett, when he was the Secretary of Education, published a little booklet called What Works. And we know what works. And, of course, Angela talked about what works. We found out one thing that doesn't work. Huge, bloated educational bureaucracies don't work very well. And so I want to get one of these former teachers to talk about this. If we put the money in the classroom in the hands of the teachers and have maybe more streamlined education, wouldn't we do better?
I agree. I'm not only a former teacher myself, but I have two daughters that are teachers. One that's currently teaching in my district where I'm running. And the truth is that studies show that only 21 cents is getting down to the classroom level, where the biggest indicator of success for a child is. And that is incredibly it's just not a good fit for our kids. We need ways to innovate in the classroom and to innovate, to motivate our districts to getting that money to the classroom and to the students. And one of the things we haven't hit on is too often schools are one size fits all. And public schools in particular can be one size fits all. And as Lisa mentioned, when you have a child that doesn't fit that one size, it's kind of hard as a parent to innovate on your own without having a lot of money to invest. And so one thing that we can do is help parents be empowered in the educational dollars that they spend on their children, that are spent on their children. And I tell you, I've got Plano in part of my district, and they have a huge problem with transparency when it comes to Robin Hood. You know, they're getting, it's 27 cents of every educational dollar is going, Austin, to someone else, that they have no voice in how that money is spent. And I'll tell you, as a taxpayer, trying to find out where the Robin Hood money is going and how it's being spent is impossible.
Transparency.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think that that's something that we can do right away, is make those educational dollar, especially when it comes to Robin Hood, transparent for the taxpayers.
Yes. Well, again, we just, Lisa, you gave us a great illustration that local control makes sense, because education in Tyler, Texas is very different than education in El Paso. Education in McKinney is very different than Oak Cliff. And so it does seem to me that somewhere along the line we need to allow a lot more local control, because the needs and the challenges are very different, even from school district to school district, aren't they?
Absolutely. And I made an effort through my campaign. I went and met with every principal at the elementary, junior high, and high school during my campaign, because I wanted to know, what are your needs? How could I help you as a legislator? None of them ever complained. They're passionate about these kids. But I will tell you, one elementary school, he had a afternoon tutor coming in and teaching these children with dyslexia. And they could see such a change daily. And these kids would run after school to her class. Well, the parents of the students that could afford it started pulling her away and offering to pay her privately. And she went to the principal and said, I would love to stay here, but I need to be paid. He said, I've got the money. I'm going to keep you. Went to his higher beings, whoever that is. And they said, well, you've got the money, but it's not to be used on her. It's to be used on this. He said, but this will not impact our children. She does. And they said, sorry. But these are kids. That's the kind of simple changes we can make. Boots on the ground. Let these principals and these teachers tell us what their needs are, not the bureaucrats telling the teachers what their needs are.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation for a few more minutes with these two individuals, again, running for the Texas House District 89 and Texas House 114, as well as Senate District 8. And so, again, Angela Paxton, Lisa Luby Ryan, and Candy Noble. And if you would like to join with us, feel free to give us a call, or simply can leave a message on our Facebook Live or even on our email, and we'll take some of those questions as well. A lot more to cover, and we will do that right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Jewish members of the Orthodox faith cannot push or carry objects outside their home during the Sabbath. However, for 2 millennia throughout the entire world, their religious tradition has expanded their home area with the creation of an eruv, but not in New Jersey. In the borough of Tenafly, Orthodox residents asked the city for permission to attach small black strips called lekis to the telephone poles in order to set the eruv boundaries. These strips are nearly identical to ordinary ground wires and certainly less noticeable from the holiday displays, signs pointing out directions to local churches, or even house numbers the city permitted on the poles on a case-by-case basis. But the city would not allow the eruvs. As a result, the Orthodox community was homebound. Mothers couldn't push their babies in strollers to the synagogue. They couldn't even carry their prayer books to the synagogue. Without court intervention, the city's action would effectively prevent the Orthodox community from practicing their faith entirely. Thankfully, the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit realized this grave First Amendment violation. It concluded that, quote, the government cannot discriminate between religiously motivated conduct and comparable secularly motivated conduct in a manner that devalues religious reasons for acting, unquote. Singling out the religious conduct of one group not only prevents the free exercise of that faith group, it damages everyone's religious liberty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
I am just so thankful for you, Kerby, and for you continuing in this ministry and for people whom God has lifted up in these last days. I just want to thank you and just ask that God would bless you.
I appreciate Point of View. You've been great and wonderful. A lot of information, and I really appreciate all your work you do.
I just wanted to call in and express my gratitude for the awesome work that you guys have done. It's I've been listening for about 6 months now, and it's just been something I can hardly miss. Thank you for giving me my daily dose of truth with a biblical worldview. I'd just like to encourage anyone listening that's inspired by Point of View to give what they can. I'm a California millennial and Christian, and I now can say I support Point of View.
I've been listening to Point of View regularly for the past year and a half, and I have to say it's been my favorite radio program. Thank you, Kerby, for continuing Marlon's legacy and carrying the torch of Point of View.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
45 years of broadcast. It'll be 46 years in the fall. Marlon Maddie started back in 1972. Before there was a Sean Hannity or a Rush Limbaugh, there was a Marlon Maddox. And Marlon Maddox, of course, has gone on to be with the Lord. And for the last 14 years, I've been sitting in this chair doing this broadcast as well. And we are privileged to have around the round table Angela Paxton, Lisa Luby, Ryan, and Candy Noble. And Candy, let me come to you for just a minute. The day after the primary, we had Jonathan Saenz on here. And we talked about some of the races, including Lisa's race and Angela's race, but we spent a fair amount of time talking about these propositions. Now, you know all about that because you helped put those on the ballot, and he reminded us that the most popular of the propositions this time was the one on the so-called bathroom bill or privacy bill. Talk about how those propositions show up on our ballot and why that one ended up being so popular.
Well, it's interesting because as a state party, both parties are allowed to put propositions on the ballot. It's by election code. And as the chairman of resolutions, it was up to us, the resolutions committee, to come up with those ballot propositions. We came up with 11. It was quite a lot, the most we've ever had. And they're kind of an opinion survey of Republican voters who are going to the ballot box. And that the privacy one in particular was very interesting because it passed with 90.26% statewide. In fact, it was interesting in our analysis to find that it didn't seem to matter whether you were urban or rural. That was a really, really important ballot issue to Republican voters. As the mom of 3 daughters and granddaughters, we want, when we go to a place in a building, in a public building that does not have security cameras, and never should bathrooms have security cameras, we want to know that we're safe and that the people that are in there are like-minded and safe. Mm-hmm. And I think that plays well. And I don't know why we're even having to have this conversation.
Yes, that's the question. A lot of our listeners say, why are we even having this conversation? Ryan Anderson, who, of course, wrote this most recent book, When Harry Became Sally, which I thought was a creative title, said, it's not that we think that somebody who's transgender might actually do something wrong, but it is with this idea that you can't keep men out of the bathroom, that some person that's a predator, Lisa, might actually use that for their advantage. Isn't that the issue?
That is the issue. But, I think Republicans did a really poor job explaining what the bathroom bill was and what it stood for. And that was the big differentiator between my opponent and myself, because he was completely against the bathroom bill. And that came up all the time. And here's set aside, Candy, I agree with you. And as legislators, we are to protect our citizens. Absolutely. But set that part aside, okay? What the bathroom bill also, it was an overreach of government by one superintendent making a decision on his own that impacted many children and families without the consent of the parents. The second thing it did, and no accountability to that superintendent, the other thing it did was it allowed private businesses such as myself to make the determination on how I want my bathrooms to be. Do I want it to be like a Target or a Hobby Lobby? And so I could choose, not mandated by the government. So I think it will come back up. And when you talk those points to people, then it makes sense. But we didn't present it that way. It was more than just boys and girls, in bathrooms.
Yes. Angela, I want to come to you, one, because, of course, it initiated in the Senate, but also, of course, you are married to the Attorney General. So I'd love to get some of your thoughts about how to present this.
Well, and you both bring up some good points. I mean, people forget the origins of this issue. And, the argument we heard from the left in the mainstream media for the most part was, government needs to get out of this. Well, the reason government got involved was because President Obama initiated this action. And the Fort Worth superintendent, as Lisa said, initiated policy in the Fort Worth School District without any input from parents or any other stakeholders in their community. And I remember when that happened, because Ken, my husband as Attorney General, went to Fort Worth and was part of some conversations with lots of families. And one of the first things he told me was, you know what, Angela, when I looked at the crowd, there weren't, this was bipartisan. It was ethnically diverse. The thing that everyone had in common was they were parents. Mm-hmm. And it didn't matter if they were black, white, red, green, whatever, if they were Republican or Democrat, if they were parents, they wanted their kids to be safe. And this is the thing. I mean, safety is one of the core functions of government. And it was very mischaracterized by its opponents. It was presented as something that was bigoted and that was discriminatory. That was not what it was about. It was about safety. And government has a duty and a responsibility to make sure that government buildings and schools are safe.
Yes. Well, again, there are all sorts of other issues we can talk about, but I've left just a little bit of time for us to go around the table one more time and talk about if people want to find you. Of course, we have links on the website, but mention your website. Lisa's been very good about giving out her email, and Candy, maybe you would too, but let's go around one more time and talk about how, if somebody wants to connect with you and your campaign, how they can do so.
Well, I'll start with my email. It's candy@CandaceNoble.com. And Candace is spelled CandaceNoble.com. My website is votecandynoble.com. And I was getting mixed up with my Facebook. My Facebook is Candy Noble HD89. I would love to hear from folks.
I might just mention next to each one of your pictures, we have both your Twitter and Facebook, but you can mention it as well in case somebody's driving. I don't want them to have an accident while it's that. But Lisa, again, if people want to contact you, how can they do so?
So I'm not going to give out my mobile number over the air. I did to 12,000 households, but I will give my email is info@lisalubyryan.org. And I, too, have a Facebook page, Lisa Luby Ryan. And we're just, Kerby, thank you so much. What a privilege to be here with you today and these other amazing women.
I suspect we'll be doing this more often. And again, like I said, both of your Twitter and Facebook pages are next to your picture. And Angela, for yours as well.
Well, thanks, Kerby. It's my email is Angela@AngelaPaxton.com, and my Facebook and Twitter, Angela Paxton TX. And it is very exciting. We the three of us have had lots of conversations. I look forward to roundtabling like this as we go forward, and hearing from your listeners, because I know that's what we care about. We care about hearing and taking those ideas of people who love the Lord, who love their communities, and who want to be salt and light to make a difference. And we're looking forward to being those voices in the Texas Senate and the Texas House.
Sure are.
And can I just add to that? I think what's amazing about the three of us is that we just want to serve. Yeah. Texas has been good to us, and this is our way of serving and giving back.
I think so. And all three of you worn out some shoes walking the precinct, so it's obvious that you want to get a response from your various constituencies. But we need to take a break. And again, I want to thank all three of you for being here. Let's do it again sometime soon.
Thanks, Kerby.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we have a lot more to cover, and you certainly can find out more about each one of these individuals by going to our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
1 minute. Give me 1 minute here for two very important points. First, Point of View listeners have worked and prayed for a long time, and a number of cultural victories appear to be within reach. Last week was huge. Many joined the Truth Team to be the change America needs to help finish these battles. If you gave, thank you. Thank you very much. And second, if you did not step up yet, you still have a chance to do something powerful. Last week, we received a $46,000 challenge gift that doubled gifts up to the total. We ended the week just short of that goal. But the donor now agreed to a brief extension. But listen, we don't get the match until we pass the finish line. Help us complete the challenge. Visit today at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. You can be the difference. Push us across the line. Step up now, 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. It is Wednesday. That is our Millennial Roundtable. I have two millennials sitting across from me. I'm not sure where Nick Pitts is today, although I think he's at a special event, and so we'll get him back in studio next week. But this is an opportunity to look at a number of issues from that perspective, but especially since we have some guests today, we're going to focus on things like free speech. We're going to look at some religious liberty issues and some other aspects of that. Chelsey Youman with us, and again, she is the Council for First Liberty Institute and an individual that has worked so tirelessly on this issue of religious liberty. So thank you for being with us today.
Well, good afternoon, Kerby. I'm happy to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. Jonathan Bodnar with us as well, individual that is an entrepreneur, works a lot in the high-tech, I-tech industry, and I got a feeling he's going to have a few things to say about Mark Zuckerberg before we get to Facebook and a few things like that. So, Jonathan, always great to have you on the program as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kerby. It's good to be here.
I think we're going to have all sorts of things to talk about. But one of the articles I wanted to bring up is by our good friend David French. He was in studio here just a few weeks ago, and he says California progressives launch another attack on free speech. So if you go to our website, you'll see this article called Another Attack on Free Speech. Now, we've had a few of these, Chelsey. One, of course, that we've talked about before, and that is a case before the Supreme Court saying that these pregnancy resource centers have to post information about abortion. And they are doing that in a large part because they want to try to close down these these pro-life clinics and these pregnancy clinics and promote abortion. And we'll get back to that in just a minute. But this latest one is even more chilling if you believe in free speech at all, because if you really understand what is being considered right now by the California State Assembly, I will quote David French, and you can come to your conclusions about that. It would essentially ban the sale of books expressing Orthodox Christian beliefs about sexual morality. He says, yes, ban the sale of books. You read the article. What's your thoughts?
Well, first I was surprised because at best this is a thinly veiled attempt to really just squelch the speech of Christians or really anyone of Judeo faith that has oftentimes millennia old Christian views on human sexuality. I mean, these are views that date back so long down to the root of whether it's, Orthodox Jewish faith, the Christian faith, the Muslim faith. They all have sincerely held religious views on these issues. And so to pass a piece of legislation that says all books are welcome, but any books that talk about these views, that's blatant viewpoint discrimination, and I can't see how it would stand up in a court of law. But again, they're in the Ninth Circuit, so we'll see. What
he also points out is that it so far has passed the committee by margins, 2 committee votes, one 8-2 and one 8-1. Because whether it was the Pregnancy Resource Center particular legislation that's made its way all the way past the Ninth Circuit Court to the Supreme Court or these others, you got to recognize for these to become law, has to pass the California Assembly, has to pass the California Senate, has to be signed by governor there, and then it almost always is appealed and has to then pass muster by the Ninth Circuit Court to make your way to the Supreme Court. And nobody along the line said, whoa, time out, wait a minute. This is not what we expect America to look like.
Well, unfortunately, we see this come time and time again out of our Pacific Coast states. So whether that's Washington and some bills they're passing now or California or Oregon, really, there's a pretty big blatant disregard by their state legislatures for the First Amendment, whether that's free speech or freedom of religion. really they have an agenda. And so these are partisan political liberal groups passing their agenda as fast and as hard as they can. And it's going to be really up to the courts to be the stopgap, unfortunately, to say, look, these are unconstitutional provisions. This is blatant discrimination against entire classes of religious adherents.
Now, again, I know that many of our listeners are in the state of California, so they may be somewhat aware of this. Most of our listeners are in 41 other states. And they're probably sitting here thinking right now, okay, Kerby, I know that you try to be balanced and fair, but you have obviously lost your perspective on this. And that's why we've posted this 4-page article by David French, because Assembly Bill 2943 makes it unlawful business practice, okay? That's a direct quote, to what? Engage in a transaction intended to result or that results in the sale or lease of goods or services to any consumer then that advertise or engage in sexual orientation change efforts with an individual. In other words, this is saying that any attempt to eliminate or reduce sexual or romantic attractions, or I think you could read this, any book written by a Christian talking about how to maybe minister to people that are to reach out in truth and love with individuals, that would be the case, or anybody that would publish a book that would raise questions about transgender. That'd be Ryan Anderson in his latest book, When Harry Became Sally. All of those would not be allowed. Jonathan, again, you've been looking at these free speech issues because you've been working on all sorts of websites and other kinds of things. We have a lawyer here, so I'm not looking for a legal answer from you, but what are your thoughts about this as a millennial, where we all of a sudden just simply now are going to bring about laws to prevent any kind of viewpoint that the politically correct crowd feels is unorthodox or contentious?
Yeah, I think it's a hard issue. I think that there's such a gray line there, and it's so blurry that it has to be defined. You can kind of even go to one of our earlier topics about, Gorsuch and the Supreme Court immigration. Mm-hmm. There's such a gray line there that it's like, okay, well, where's that drawn? And it might be a stretch to propose this, but isn't changing gender medically and giving someone, the medical procedure and everything, isn't that diffusing attraction to the other side of the situation, the other sex? So I don't know. You can kind of go both ways on that.
Yeah, I wonder where this might go ultimately, Chelsey, because it could say that any kind of therapy of any sort or any kind of counsel of any sort that would cause a person to reevaluate their, quote, sexual orientation could be unlawful.
Right. Well, that's actually the first thought that came to my mind, Kerby, was we represent and advise at First Liberty Institute so many biblical counselors and churches and nonprofit organizations, you name it, schools even would fall into this category, who do have biblical counseling programs. And you can call a hotline and get help for any issues you're having. And of course, anyone with an LPC in the state of Texas, it's licensed counselors, but even in California, they might not be able to counsel in accordance with their biblical views if something like this is passed, let alone hand out the material, right? To allow someone to know what are the biblical views. And technically, wouldn't the Bible fall under this category? I mean, if you're thinking about it, so, a lot of scripture speaks to these human sexuality topics and issues. And I don't know how broad this would go, but I really do. I am very hopeful that this will be challenged in court of law. If you're in the state of California and you think this is going to apply to you, call First Liberty. Reach out to us at firstliberty.org, and we could get some pre-litigation up and running and really challenge this unconstitutional law. Again, if we understand it, and this is on the 3rd page, and again, I encourage you to read this. Don't take our word for it. David French has done a very good job, and of course, he's got a Harvard Law degree, so he's looked at this with some kind of scrutiny. Says this could be a ban on goods, that would be like a book or the Bible or whatever, or a service, that could be things like counseling. And so I don't think we're overplaying this, but just another illustration of yet one more attack on free speech. We have a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Dr. Tim Keller was on my radio program recently to talk about his new book, Making Sense of God, An Invitation to the Skeptical. In many ways, it was a prequel to his earlier apologetics book, The Reason for God, Belief in an Age of Skepticism. His earlier book, The Reason for God, deals with two large issues, doubt and the reasons for faith. For the skeptic, he attempts to answer the major questions that keep skeptics from biblical faith. These are questions about whether there can even be one true religion. And if God exists, how can a good God allow suffering in the world? He also tackles whether science has disproved Christianity. His new book, An Invitation to the Skeptical, starts at the beginning, since he has found that many might not even want to consider God, religion, and Christianity because it doesn't seem relevant enough to their lives. In a number of chapters, he begins to answer some important preliminary questions. For example, many skeptics feel that there is no need to believe in a God to have a full life of hope and meaning. They also believe that they can live their lives from any religious constraints, at least as long as they don't harm others. Moreover, they believe that they don't need God to have a basis for moral values and human rights. Tim Keller takes the time to point out the errors in those beliefs, often by showing that the person with a secular point of view also exercises faith. It isn't just the religious person who exercises faith. Everyone exercises faith. And after showing the failure of secularism and postmodernism, he concludes by showing that it is reasonable to believe in God. Both of these books address important theological and apologetic questions. I recommend both of them because they are great resources to put in the hands of your secular friends. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Hello, Point of View listener. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. Point of View Radio is so important to the Christian community in our country. Kerby Anderson's been a personal friend of mine for a long time. He's one of the best, very best in Christian broadcasting. And Marlon Maddox, the founder of Point of View, was a great friend of my dad's, Don Wildman. So our ties go way back. But Point of View is still aired here on American Family Radio, and we're proud to bring it to our listeners. Kerby and the team do a great job of giving a biblical worldview analysis of current events and issues that are in the news that we need to know about so we can be informed, engaged, and make a difference in our cultures. Folks, Kerby Anderson and the team there deserve your financial support. Write them a check, give them a donation with your credit card, whatever you can do to help them keep the cause of Christ before the public on their radio program, Point of View.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Our Millennial Roundtable, Jonathan Bodnar, Chelsey Youman with us. And let me just mention that we had our Truth Team last week. And this is something that's never happened before. But on Friday, we actually had some match money that did not actually get fulfilled. And so as I've told you over the last 2 days, and I'll mention again today, we have just a small amount left, which means that if you have not joined with us, your gift will be doubled right now, and I suspect we'll be able to finish that off soon. So, again, be one of those to help us reach the goal line. Again, the pledge line number is 800-347-5151, and that means, again, with a match that's on the table, your $100 gift becomes $200. Or maybe you say, I can only give $50. $50 becomes $100. I hope at least this hour I might pick up one of you that might want to actually join the Truth Team. For as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year, you can be part of the Truth Team. And, of course, you can also find out more by going to our website, pointofview.net. You'll find out more about Jonathan and Chelsey. You'll see many of the articles we're talking about today, but there's also a button which says Join Now. And as you go there, you'll see that there are some welcome gifts we'd like to put in your hands at your giving level. So we hope that you will consider what you might do to support this ministry. And we still have just a little bit of the match left on the table. So I thought I would allow you to take that opportunity to make your pledge and then to help us finish off. Again, as we're only looking for a pledge, you don't have to have all the money now, and no gift is too small, no gift is too large. We've been talking about one of the articles we posted, another attack on free speech. But, Jonathan, you mentioned the first article we've posted, and this one is intriguing because, again, the Associated Press doesn't always do the best job with the headlines, but that's what the headline says. Supreme Court just handed the Trump administration a loss on immigration, and Gorsuch was the tie-breaking vote. So it sounds like if you read that without knowing the background, that Donald Trump made a big mistake by putting Justice Neil Gorsuch on this court, and one of the Trump administration's policies was declared unconstitutional. That's not what happened. Chelsey, you're the lawyer. Let's at least help the Associated Press get their headline and their article right, okay?
That's right. I'm so glad we were able to talk about this. Thank you, Kerby, because, I initially read that and thought exactly what you said. Well, the Trump administration must have had a policy that was unconstitutional. No, that's not the case. They analyzed a law dating back to 2004. So it's not a Trump administration law or executive order. It really has nothing to do with the Trump administration other than the fact that they're legally responsible for defending federal laws. Right. Okay, so that's really the tie-in there. But when you read the opinion, this comes down to Gorsuch being a purist on originalism. And I was very pleasantly surprised when I read his opinion, which he had a concurring opinion. He didn't side completely with all the liberal justices. He had his own opinion in there. And then he really analyzed the history of the Due Process Clause, which says you have to be on notice as a citizen. It is your constitutional right to be on notice as to what's criminal activity, what is illegal activity, and what are the punishments for that going to be, so that you know if I steal, this is what stealing is, and I can be put in jail for that. And that's just part of your right as a citizen to know what the laws are and are not. And if they are unclear, then they're unconstitutional this is a very brief analysis. So if you want to call and debate me, we can. I'll get into more detail. But all that to say, the other conservative bloc of justices looked more at the actual verbiage of the statute itself, and all of their analysis said, well, we think these tiny, these words and the distinction here between these words, and when they viewed the statute, they said it wasn't too vague. It wasn't too vague for the average citizen to be on notice. But Gorsuch dated back almost 500 years of history. It's a real history lesson if you're interested or need some pre-sleep reading. But it's a history lesson dating back to England on where that concept originates, what is the original intent of our founding fathers in protecting your rights as a citizen. And that's what his analysis is rendered under. And actually, I think it looks a lot like Scalia.
Yes.
A lot like Scalia.
When I saw this, I thought I would tell the story. And again, since we have millennials around the table, maybe you weren't around when this happened, but in 1984, we had a Republican convention here in Dallas. And I was writing columns for the Dallas Morning News, so I got to go to the convention and got to cover some of that. And I saw this man who was out there burning an American flag. And that case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And when it went to the Supreme Court, Antonin Scalia, who is the predecessor to Judge Neil Gorsuch, now Justice Neil Gorsuch, actually said, I personally am repulsed by somebody that would burn an American flag. But that being said, I believe in the Constitution. The Constitution gives a person a right of free speech. So even though I reject emotionally what he did, I have to rule according to the Constitution and rule that he was protected by the First Amendment. I had that same feeling with Judge Gorsuch. Some people look at this and they're going to say, oh, well, see, Trump made a big mistake by putting Neil Gorsuch on the court. No, it's back to something Kelly Shackelford has said here as well. the 4 liberals, you know how they're going to vote every time. They're going to vote as liberals. They're never going to look at the constitutional arguments. They don't care. It's very obvious. There was a study done a while back, could not find a time in which those 4 did not vote in lockstep. Not so with the conservatives. I just mentioned Antonin Scalia. Here's one with Neil Gorsuch. How about the Chief Justice himself on Obamacare, and some of these others, Justice Kennedy on same-sex marriage. So a lot of it has to do with the fact that most of these people that I believe Donald Trump's put in on the court are going to look at it on what does the Constitution say or what does the Constitution not say. And in some respects, they're going to be open to more discussion than, say, the liberals are, who've made up their mind before they even hear oral arguments.
That is so right. To any of our listeners out there who are now going to look at a little more skeptically upon Gorsuch as a choice, I just say you don't have to do that. Scalia said if you are a good judge, if you are a neutral judge applying the laws of the land in a constitutional way, you're going to draft opinions you don't like.
Yes.
And that might be what we're seeing here. I'm not shaken by it at all. In fact, I read it and I immensely respect his analysis. And I think it's a very originalist view. I think he's really going to have his own clear methodology here. And ultimately, it's to protect constitutional rights of our country.
I think I'll go read the opinion, but again, it might put me to sleep, but we'll see. Jonathan, help us out for just a minute because people may not know the case. This is an individual that came from the Philippines, came here legally, but nevertheless pleaded no contest to 2 charges of burglary, and the government said, okay, that makes you a felon or it makes you violent or whatever it might be. And we can go through how that's, and so we're going to deport you. And so that, I think, is a key point here, that this was a person that actually came here legally.
Yeah, I think the biggest gray line in the bill was the fact that, or the question of, is it a crime in violence or violence committed in the crime? Right. And I'm with Chelsey on this. I respect Gorsuch for his decision quite a bit because I feel like he kind of sends it back and says, hey, wait, we need more clarification on this because we can't just, if somebody jaywalks, which is a crime, we can't attach a violence to that. And just, there's way too much interpretation. It's way too open for interpretation. And so there's a big issue there.
Well, when you think about this, 2004, we're talking about George W. Bush. This isn't even an Obama regulation. This goes back 2 administrations.
That's right. And, if you think about it, too, what Gorsuch ruled was actually it involves an immense amount of what they call judicial restraint. He said this is not up to the courts to decide these issues, to decide how violent is too violent of a crime to require deportation. That's up to your legislators. That's up to the elected, voters to vote for elected officials who are going to make the rules. And so I respect the decision.
I do too.
If anything, he's protecting the rights of keeping it outside of government's hands and saying, hey, this isn't government's job, and or at least, national government. And so
it's not our court's job either. I think if nothing else, this is a warning to those members of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. Stop sending bills to the president, and the president stop signing bills that are too vague. Do your job. Don't make the courts do your job for you. And so, if anything, many people see this as a loss for the Trump administration. I think it is a victory for the Constitution. Well, we have some things to talk about. Facebook next, so we'll get to that. But if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
1 minute. Give me 1 minute here for 2 very important points. First, Point of View listeners have worked and prayed for a long time, and a number of cultural victories appear to be within reach. Last week was huge. Many joined the Truth Team to be the change America needs to help finish these battles. If you gave, thank you. Thank you very much. And second, if you did not step up yet, you still have a chance to do something powerful. Last week, we received a $46,000 challenge gift that doubled gifts up to the total. We ended the week just short of that goal. But the donor now agreed to a brief extension. But listen, we don't get the match until we pass the finish line. Help us complete the challenge. Visit today at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. You can be the difference. Push us across the line. Step up now, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Chelsey Youman with us and Jonathan Bodnar. And Jonathan, I'm going to come to you in just a minute because we've had now 2 days of congressional hearings last week with Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook. And that has raised a lot of questions. In just a few minutes, I'm going to read some quotes from Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Ben Sasse. But I want to look at the broader issue. And one of the things that we make available to any of our listeners that give at the $45 a month level are these books booklets, and this one is on privacy and surveillance. And one of the arguments I make is that for some time we have had our, if you will, privacy invaded because big corporations, and Facebook is one of those, have been collecting data on that. It's called big data, and that has been useful in marketing. And anybody that doesn't believe it happens, we had somebody here the other day that had worked with Rush Limbaugh, and he had something that he did for one of the first Liberty events where he had a husband and wife actually get on laptop computers, do the identical Google search, and the things that showed up were different because of the history, their past history. Look at the ads, his ads, her ads, all that. This has been going on long before Facebook, hasn't it?
It has, and I love how people, well, I don't love, I find it funny that people are kind of dogging Facebook as the or putting them on a pillar as the originator of this issue, and they're not. Like you just mentioned, Google. I mean, Google is billions and billions. They're worth what, $920 billion. And
yes.
Big data is not something Facebook invented. There's hundreds of thousands of companies out there, very large tech companies, where they make the most money off of a free product. If it is free, you are the product,
That's
hands
right.
down. If you are downloading an app and it is a free app,
your data is the product.
Exactly. And
That's right.
They can build, Google knows more about you than you know about you because they can take your search and they can take your information and they can parse it out and build a psychological profile on you that you don't even understand. Things that you don't understand about yourself, they know about you. And so they know, well, they're going to, eventually in 5 years need this ad. And so they're planning 30 years out on you and profiling you out. And, Facebook is just the tip of the iceberg. And it's kind of funny that, he had to sit in front of, the courts and stuff, and Google doesn't.
We'll talk about it. And of course, one of the things I've talked about is in privacy and surveillance. I talk about that this has changed because before we did the Millennial Roundtable, we sometimes would do programs, especially in the 1990s, about privacy. And that time's when it really started to develop. And the Clinton administration began to do some kinds of surveillance. And there were all sorts of people concerned about privacy. What I found, as I talk about in the book here, you millennials aren't as concerned about it because you've grown up expecting it. After all, if you post articles or comments on Facebook, you expect people to see them. If you post embarrassing videos on YouTube, you expect your friends to see them. Now, I always like to point out that eventually the human rights groups and human resource groups and future employers and even other individuals see them as well. But this is something where you've grown up really with a generation that's expected that anything I put online probably is going to be seen by lots and lots of people. As a matter of fact, even you hope that lots of people will see them because it'll, quote, go viral, right?
Yeah. I mean, we've grown up in a generation of just a lot of transparency, but the irony behind that is that transparency created a profile, like you really try and be somebody else online versus, who you actually are and stuff. And so, that's what makes Google and Facebook so valuable, especially Google, because they know what you're actually thinking and Facebook only knows what you're trying to project.
I'm going to say I'm an outlier maybe then on this millennial spectrum we're talking about, because even though I'm an older millennial, I might expect my information to be out there, but I don't like it.
Yes.
And I wish that there were stronger privacy laws in place and stronger regulations in place. And I always use this example because my husband very much is on Jonathan's side of this, where he says, well, what do you expect? It's a free app. You don't have to use it. Get off the app if you don't like it. And I mean, he doesn't talk to me like that, but that's a general view of the situation.
Show on marriage.
A word to all husbands, don't
No, but that's just his general view, in my words, of the situation. And I stopped him and said, that would be like saying, I'm going to print off all of our bank account numbers and all of their assets and all that private information, and then just hand it out to companies to use. Like, wouldn't you still have a check about that? Or giving someone your private emails, passwords, so that your entire company can read all of your personal emails? I mean, there should be a check inside that says, there's just because there's nothing wrong with it doesn't mean that it all needs to be out there. And there are laws on the books, which is why Facebook has an FTC investigation, an FBI investigation, and a DOJ investigation. And then those are the three I know of at this point. So there are privacy laws being violated. And that is because just like our banks or any other company that has our account numbers and private billing information and things like that, they have a duty to protect it.
Right.
There's a Privacy Act in place. I know Europe has a very strong Privacy Act against corporations they've passed in the last few years to protect us as consumers and make sure, A, we know what we are getting into, and then B, that we have choices. And that leads me to something else, which nobody's really talked about, which is antitrust law.
There you go.
So the truth is, there isn't another platform, and this came up in Zuckerberg's hearing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there isn't another platform that's just like Facebook for people to choose between. And the whole point of antitrust law or against, you know, being against monopolies is that consumers should have choices and they should have options. If we don't like your product or the way you're running your product or what you're doing with our information, we should have an option to go elsewhere and a viable option. And so even American Airlines was involved in a monopoly suit. And we can all agree there's other airline options, but none of those airlines at the time were doing what American Airlines was doing. And so thinking of it in kind of a broader sense, that's probably why the DOJ is involved.
Well, and again, the censorship is an issue because, you know, we've talked about before that you've had censorship of all sorts of things. Facebook shut down Chick-fil-A Appreciation Day. Facebook shut down some of the things that were done by a former governor and presidential candidate. It has also blocked some posts by a Fox News reporter, Todd Starnes, who many might know. And can I mention Diamond and Silk? That's another one of those that has surfaced here as well. And we can go on and on and on. And again, you could say, well, then go start your own Facebook. But that'd be like saying to the phone company back when it had a monopoly, well, go start your own phone company.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's kind of difficult to do because of some of the restrictions. So on the one hand, these are private companies, but they use, if you will, public lines. That's called the internet. What about that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, you say, you know, Facebook, you can't go out and you can't duplicate Facebook and you can't like recreate it. One of the biggest reasons you can't recreate it is because of the massive value that it has and the massive value that you gave it. There was the terms of service at the bottom.
There was no gun in my head,
exactly.
or your head or anybody else's.
And
That's
you
right.
read that, but there are alternative platforms. The problem is that, and this might go to censorship and everything, but the problem is these platforms can't get out there. There's a company called Gab, G-A-B, and it's a free speech. You're allowed to, you know, say anything you want, social media, and they don't harvest your data. They don't do any of that. But the problem is that Apple refuses to allow them on the iTunes store because it's apparently a violation of people's speech and it's hate speech and everything. So they refuse. So it's only on Android. But it's a viable extra
Sounds
option.
like a monopoly to me.
Sure.
I don't know.
Well, let's get into a couple of these quotes. Senator Ben Sasse, one of our heroes, a Republican from Nebraska, said Facebook, and this is a quote, Facebook may decide it needs to police a whole bunch of speech that I think America might be better off not having policed by one company that has really big and powerful platforms. Can you define hate speech? Crickets. Mark Zuckerberg somehow did not expect that question. How you could end up in the United States Senate in a committee meeting where the biggest issue is, for Big Ben Sasse, hate speech. And especially when you've had, you know, Chuck Colson's Manhattan Declaration taken off the iTunes store. Facebook has prevented individuals from being able to have this because that was seen as hate speech. Diamond and Silk, they were taken off because it's unsafe for the community. But he didn't have an answer for a definition of hate speech. That kind of bothered me a little bit.
He might not have an answer publicly, but we know privately, as you mentioned, they have ansers to that. I think
they
I read
have algorithms.
I think I read they have 20,000 individuals based out of Silicon Valley who decide what is and is not hate speech. One good example in the local Dallas area of what was considered to be
your case. Yeah.
violative of this policy is a local church, Scott Sanford's church, had an Easter Sunday video with kids and bunnies and Easter egg. It's a promotional video saying, "Come to our church."
Yes.
And that was pulled off of Facebook. That ad was deemed to be non-compliant with their hate speech, bunnies and children. And so I think it's pretty clear they've got an agenda. Obviously, First Liberty Institute stepped in and had a really great resolution to that. And the state attorney general actually, got involved because, again, that's an issue.
Yeah. So again, a clear example that we see just down the road. By the way, great pastor, great church, all sorts of stuff, but it was controversial to have kids and bunnies. Where do we go? If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Every 4 years, Americans experience a national transition as a new executive is inaugurated. Today, Donald Trump will recite the oath of office, likely ending with the traditional declaration, "So help me God." Some question whether George Washington actually said, "So help me God," starting a tradition maintained by most of our presidents, but we do know Washington's other words. Moments after taking the oath, Washington retreated inside Federal Hall and offered his inaugural address. As he remarked, quote, "It would be peculiarly improper to omit in this first official act my fervent supplications to that almighty being who rules over the universe, who presides in the councils of nations, and whose providential aids can supply every human defect, that his benediction may consecrate to the liberties and happiness of the people of the United States." He continued, expressing his, quote, "homage to the great author of every public and private good," by reminding his audience that, quote, "no people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than the people of the United States." These are the words of the same man who would remind our nation at the end of his presidency that both religion and morality are indispensable supports of political happiness. So, today, our nation joins President Trump as he implores God's help while in office. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
I want to say, first of all, that I really enjoyed the Millennial Roundtable, and I love the program altogether. I think Kerby is great, and I really appreciate all of y'all, all that y'all do, and the truth that y'all put out.
I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show.
Point of View is actually a lifeline for me, and I'm actually a third-generation Point of View listener. I homeschool my girls, and I don't think I could do what I do without Point of View on a daily basis. Without ministries like Point of View, we really don't have much hope for the future of our children, our grandchildren. I can't see a better way to invest in our future than to support Point of View.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Couple great quotes. One, I love the Millennial Roundtable. Well, that's what you're listening to right now. We're going to rotate out and bring Colonel Alan West in the next hour, but you'll have a chance to continue to hear the program here. And then third generation, second generation listeners, many of you that listen on the computer right now heard Jeremy Dice, and he was telling us just the other day when he was here on Friday of sitting in a van waiting for his sister to finish the music lesson and listening to this show called Point of View. And so, again, a generational kind of impact. And as we've said before, you can join the Truth Team. And for those of you that join at a higher level, $45 a month. Why $45? Well, because we've been around since 1972. Marlon Maddox started the show in 1972, so it's been more than 45 years, which is longer than anybody around the table except me has been around. But nevertheless, one of the things we make available are these booklets. And one of the ones I just talked about was, of course, Privacy and Surveillance. We have the one on Second Amendment, Making Your Vote Count, Homosexual Theology, Sharia law, politicized culture, capitalism and socialism. So just another benefit of you joining with us. And I think we may still have some match money on the table. And if that's the case, that means your gift of $100 becomes $200 if you join the Truth Team for $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year. That would be the case. If you want to join at $45 a month, of course, that is an opportunity for us to send those booklets as well. What about bias? Senator Ted Cruz asked this question of Mark Zuckerberg. Do you consider yourself a neutral public forum? Which was a good question, because sometimes they say, well, we're just a platform. We're not taking any stands on these issues. And other times they act kind of like a news outlet. And he said, I say there are a great many Christians and Americans who I think are deeply concerned that Facebook and other tech companies are engaged in a pervasive pattern of bias and political censorship. It's a private company, Chelsey, but at the same time, you're using, in a sense, like the public airwaves. You're using public internet. So it's difficult to figure out how to control that, but there's a lot of evidence that certain algorithms and all those thousands and tens of thousands of people there are making decisions about what is or is not appropriate on the Facebook platform.
Yes. Well, of course, the first thing that we have to say is that they are a private company at this point until these investigations deem them a monopoly, which means that they have a duty to the public to be more neutral, or until, as Cruz is mentioning, they're deemed a public forum, which is the equivalent, by the way, of a park, a sidewalk, anywhere you could speak publicly, your beliefs or your political views, anything like that, that has the utmost First Amendment non-censorship protections of our Constitution, which he's comparing them to. I think it's an interesting comparison, but, we're going to get into this gray area of who has what rights, because private companies do have First Amendment speech rights. Yes. They do have a right to portray a message that is consistent with their own viewpoint. And so we're getting into really, an area where there's going to be some hard questions here. In fact, I researched this recently, and the only state that I know of that has ever said a website or the internet is a public forum, like a park or sidewalk, is California. And it's a really small district court in the state of California. It was one decision. I think that this is a lot of uncharted territory that has yet to be decided. But the good news is, as with all of our laws, no matter how much our society changes or grows, we still have our roots in the Constitution, and we still have these fundamental concepts to protect our freedoms. And I think all of our laws should really relate back to those. We have some blueprints to go by.
Well, Jonathan, again, I understand it's a public forum, but on the one hand, you have some of our progressive friends saying, we want to force you to bake a cake for a lesbian wedding. We want to force you to photograph a lesbian ceremony. We want to force you to actually participate in this through floral arrangements or accommodations of some sort. But on the other hand, we're just a public forum. We won't actually do any censorship. Somewhere along the line, we need some consistency, don't you think?
I do. It's hard because Facebook, like Chelsey said, she couldn't have said it better myself. She said that they are a private company. And at the end of the day, they do have their First Amendment rights. But that, I do think that you get into a massive issue. And, especially as a Christian myself, like when you start censoring, Christianity, you start censoring stuff. The other article we were talking about the gender dysphoria and everything, and you start saying, hey, you can't publish a book because it, goes against what we believe and everything, then, you really dig deep. And so I don't know. I really don't.
I would like to just say, though, and maybe one good distinguishment to make, and this might be where people start to draw some lines, is, in the case of the bakers, the clients are First Liberty clients, and they baked the cake, or did not bake the cake, excuse me. part of the legal analysis is whether that couple had alternative options.
Right.
And whether they could go buy that cake elsewhere, which they did and got it for free. That really goes towards some of this analysis here is, does the Christian group who has a prayer app, who Apple refuses to allow to use their platform, do they have somewhere else to go? So that's going to be some questions that really only our legislators in the court will decide.
And as we've said on this program before, take the one that we talked about last week, Colonel Leland Bohannon. He said, I just could not in good conscience sign a certificate of appreciation. But then he gives it to a 2-star general, which in some respects makes the certificate of appreciation even more valuable than from
yes, I
a
think
colonel,
so.
Don't you think?
Yes.
And the pharmacist that says, I can't in good conscience provide you with an abortifacient, but there's a pharmacy down the street where you can go and get that.
Mm-hmm.
In those cases, that's where I think it should stop. But as we know, the LGBT community, they're going to go all out to say, even by transferring that or providing an alternative, we deserve to go to court. We deserve to drive your career in the case of the colonel or drive your business in the case of the Kleins into oblivion. And that's where I think we don't have this live and let live philosophy that most Americans try to live by.
Oh, that is so true that there's not a two-way street here. I think it's pretty clear just from the nature of my work that especially Christian values, but really all faith-based values really have a hard time withstanding some of the liberal scrutiny.
We are going to take a break, and then when we come back, Alan West is going to be with us, and we've posted his article in which he talks about a weapon against free speech, and it's on Facebook. So we'll keep that conversation going. So those of you calling in, we'll take those phone calls in just a minute. But Chelsey, I know we've got to get you back to do all the legal work, but let's mention again that we have a link to First Liberty and talk about what is available to our listeners and sign up to get the prayer requirements, because you just have, 6 court cases that could end up on the Supreme Court.
Yes, listeners, please be praying for us and our cases. We have 6 potential matters going to the Supreme Court in this session. So in the next couple of months, we'll have answers on all of those. So sign up for our prayer list at firstliberty.org. And make sure to get Liberty Watch, which is our news article. It comes out once a week. You'll just get to see what happened that week, which often is very exciting. There's a lot going on. You'll hear about one of my cases, CTC, on Friday, if you get that.
So that's good. Jonathan will stay with us in the next hour. Colonel Alan West, I got a feeling you have something to say about Syria, and I know he has lots to say about Facebook. So we have a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after these important messages.
1 minute. Give me 1 minute here for 2 very important points. First, Point of View listeners have worked and prayed for a long time, and a number of cultural victories appear to be within reach. Last week was huge. Many joined the Truth Team to be the change America needs to help finish these battles. If you gave, thank you. Thank you very much. And second, if you did not step up yet, you still have a chance to do something powerful. Last week, we received a $46,000 challenge gift that doubled gifts up to the total. We ended the week just short of that goal. But the donor now agreed to a brief extension. But listen, we don't get the match until we pass the finish line. Help us complete the challenge. Visit today at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. You can be the difference. Push us across the line. Step up now, 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We've kind of switched out our roundtable, and it's still, of course, kind of the Millennial Roundtable, but not as many millennials now, because we still have Jonathan Bodnar with us, and we have brought in Colonel Alan West.
Definitely not a millennial.
Not a millennial, but you have some in your family, I think, that fit into that category. Represented, of course, the 22nd District in the state of Florida at some time, and was the head for a while of the Center for Security, Center for Policy, CPA, I got that wrong, but I knew I would mess it up. National Center for Policy Analysis, and more importantly, a Fox News contributor and just a good friend of this ministry. So
Absolutely.
Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure, Kerby.
One of the articles we've posted, Colonel Alan West, is Syrian attack was troubling, but a more dangerous weapon is being unleashed on America. And that's going to get us back to our conversation we've had in the last hour on Facebook. But since we're talking about Syria for just a minute, I'd love to get your comments, because this is a difficult set of circumstances. You can say that since the end of the Cold War, we've been able to keep Russia out of a lot of parts of the Middle East. Now they're there, and they're in Syria. Same time, we've got to be concerned about the use of chemical weapons. We've got to be concerned about our Kurds, who are some of the few allies we have apart from Israel. So this is a difficult call about how to approach Syria, especially since any strategic interests for the United States are fairly limited. So how do you look at this?
Well, the thing is, this is a result of 8 years of strategic patience, or leading from behind, which down south we call following. So you enable Russia and also Iran to expand and go become primary actors in the region. When you're sending, pallets of, money laundered cash in the middle of the night, then Iran has been able to extend their hegemonic dominance out of Iran across Iraq and over to Syria. And, of course, we know about Hezbollah there in Lebanon. So the thing is, without a doubt, when you use chemical weapons, that's a violation of the rules-based international order. The world has to take an action, and we saw them take an action. The most important thing was that the Russians and the Iranians really believed that we would go after the delivery means, the aerial delivery means, the airstrips or whatever. And so they intermingled their stuff there because they wanted to, instigate that. And so the attack against the weapons facility, the production facilities, that was very smart, because, again, it gave them an opportunity to say, understand, we'll take an action. And next time you may be included if you continue to support this. But we've got to have economic sanctions against Russia. We've got to decertify the Iranian nuclear agreement next month in May. Because the key thing is to take away the resource and support that Bashar al-Assad has. We don't need to get involved in his civil war, but the most important thing is not allow him to become a client state of those two state sponsors of his actions, and also the state sponsor of terrorism.
If you look to the south, of course, you have Israel, and next month is a celebration. I'm fearful that Hamas or Hezbollah or others, again, maybe Iran using some kind of proxy war will attack them. So that's another concern that certainly is in the minds of now, I guess, John Bolton and a variety of other individuals that find themselves in that position. Of course, President Trump as well.
Well, Russia and Iran really got thrown a curveball when John Bolton became the National Security Advisor, because he understands the world in very clear and distinct black and white perspectives. The other thing is, you're right, Israel is not going to tolerate a Hamas, which is supported by Iran, and a Hezbollah to this north, supported by Iran. And the fact that Iran is building military bases and airstrips there, we know that the Israelis have been shooting down Iranian drones. over their airspace. And so I think that they will take care of any incursion, any problems that we see coming out of Syria. But the most important thing we can do is externally cut off the support to Assad.
Well, again, did want to ask a question or two about Syria. And if you want to ask any questions or make some comments, certainly that is fair game. But the article we've posted here, I always like to post at least one of the Allen West articles, and it came out recently. The Syrian attack was troubling, but a more dangerous weapon is being unleashed on America. And that is what? Well, the determination that certain speech is allowed, certain speech is not. And you use a good example. The speech of Diamond and Silk was unsafe for the community. You can't make this stuff up, can you?
No, you can't make this stuff up. And so the news cycle, as I said in the article, is so interesting because, last week Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, is there, House and Senate testimony. And he said some things that should really be troubling for us here in the United States of America. But, of course, when you start to lob, 109 Tomahawk cruise missiles at someone, that dominates the news cycle. But when Senator Cruz asked him specifically about that Diamond and Silk case, he did not have a very good answer. As a matter of fact, he didn't answer whatsoever. But the fact that Mark Zuckerberg acknowledged that Silicon Valley, where most of these tech social media platforms are located, is without a doubt a bastion for progressive socialist ideological thought, and that he has 20,000 people that are out there monitoring Facebook, making the determinations about what is hate speech and what is not. Well, if your determination is based upon your own ideological agenda, then I got a problem with that. And pretty much so that's what he admitted is happening in Facebook. And I've had, personally, I've had some issues with Facebook and the algorithm management that they have. I'm sure, Jonathan, you understand a lot better than I do since I'm on the other side of 50. But still, it should really worry us that the Google, the YouTube, the Facebook, the Twitter, the Instagram. Look at what Dennis Prager is going through with YouTube. Look at what I talked about Representative Marsha Blackburn, who was not allowed to make a tweet on a pro-life statement. So this is very disconcerting.
And again, that article is on our website, about 2 pages long. And if we can, for just a minute, Jonathan, let's talk about those algorithms, because Steve Scalise, who, I don't know, could be the next Speaker of the House for all we know, said after this new algorithm was implemented, there was a tremendous bias against conservative news and content. And he said, who developed the algorithm? Was there a directive to put bias in? Can you write an algorithm in such a way that just without anybody touching a button eliminate certain kinds of programs, certain kinds of articles?
Exactly. You can do just that. And more so, if you remember, it must have been about 3-4 months ago, Facebook released an algorithm to start filtering. And that's, much like what you're talking about, start filtering which news actually shows up in certain people's Facebook feeds and everything. And they poll a lot of that. Their cover of that is polling what you are most likely to click. And so what they tell you is, well, we've learned what you've clicked on in the past, so now we know what you're actually going to click on. But in the back end of that, there's so much space to really, really monitor that and kind of pick and choose what's good and what's not good and what they think is beneficial for you to read.
Well, again, we mentioned Marsha Blackburn. One of the questions she asked is, do you subjectively manipulate your algorithms to prioritize or censor speech? I think most of us have seen the conclusion, so we'll have to talk about that. And when we come back, Colonel Allen West, I want to talk about Ben Sasse. He asked some questions about hate speech. And it just amazes me because if you were going into the United States Senate and you knew Ben Sasse was going to ask a question, you know what that question was going to be. A man who's been for months and even years, even since his campaign, talking about hate speech. And I didn't think Mark Zuckerberg had a very good answer. So let's take a break. But when we come back, I want to hear some of your comments. We did talk about Facebook a little bit in the first hour. We certainly now want to open up the phones and get your comments as well, whether it's Facebook or whether it's YouTube. Certainly that's another issue which we talked about and mentioned with Dennis Prager, whether it's Twitter or even some of the Apple apps, because we'll give you some examples there. What about this censorship? What do you think should be done? 1-800-351-1212. We'll take your calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Dr. Tim Keller was on my radio program recently to talk about his new book, Making Sense of God, An Invitation to the Skeptical. In many ways, it was a prequel to his earlier apologetics book, The Reason for God, Belief in an Age of Skepticism. His earlier book, The Reason for God, deals with two large issues, doubt and the reasons for faith. For the skeptic, he attempts to answer the major questions that keep skeptics from biblical faith. These are questions about whether there can even be one true religion. And if God exists, how can a good God allow suffering in the world? He also tackles whether science has disproved Christianity. His new book, An Invitation to the Skeptical, starts at the beginning, since he has found that many might not even want to consider God, religion, and Christianity because it doesn't seem relevant enough to their lives. In a number of chapters, he begins to answer some important preliminary questions. For example, many skeptics feel that there is no need to believe in a God to have a full life of hope and meaning. They also believe that they can live their lives from any religious constraints, at least as long as they don't harm others. Moreover, they believe that they don't need God to have a basis for moral values and human rights. Tim Keller takes the time to point out the errors in those beliefs, often by showing that the person with a secular point of view also exercises faith. It isn't just the religious person who exercises faith. Everyone exercises faith. And after showing the failure of secularism and postmodernism, he concludes by showing that it is reasonable to believe in God. Both of these books address important theological and apologetic questions. I recommend both of them because they are great resources to put in the hands of your secular friends. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Hi, this is Lee Strobel, author of The Case for Christ and my new book, The Case for Miracles. You know, one of the best ways that we can grow in our ability to understand why we believe what we believe is to get an ongoing dose of God's truth into our lives. And one of the best ways of all to do that, Kerby Anderson does a tremendous job of giving us a regular diet of evidence, of logic, of God's truth from His Word, so that we can continue to do what 1 Peter 3:15 tells us, to always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks us to give the reason for the hope that we have, and to do it gently and with respect. So I am a huge fan of Kerby. I'm a huge fan of Point of View. I know that you probably are as well. That's why you're listening, and I hope you'll get behind them, support them, so that this ministry can continue on into the future and flourish even more next year than this year.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Lee Strobel with us in the past, and he actually took the time to say how he really appreciates what we do here. And, of course, we not only help you articulate a biblical point of view, but also know how to defend a biblical point of view. And certainly this area of evangelism and apologetics is his strong suit. And let me just mention that was part of our event last week, Truth Team. And we had a little bit of leftover match money, which means if you want to join, and as I've said before with these little booklets, here's one, for example, on privacy and surveillance, what we're talking about right now, the most recent one on Second Amendment. By the way, I'm sitting across from somebody that is going to be at the NRA convention because he's one of those individuals that has been providing guidance to them all these years. Those are resources we put in your hands if you join at, I think it's the $45 a month level, but you can go to our website, pointofview.net, and see what you would like to do as a one-time gift or even to join the Truth Team for as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, $360 a year. We certainly do encourage you to do that, and you'll help us finish off that match money that we have there as well. Let's, if we can, talk about this. You know, one of the people you quote here, Allen West, is, of course, an individual running for office. She's, of course, been in the Congress, Marsha Blackburn, but now running for the Senate. But Twitter said, well, you know, you've got this pro-life comment, and so we'll just pull that off. So that's why she asked the other day, do you subjectively manipulate your algorithms to prioritize or censor speech? Because she felt like, at least on Facebook and obviously on Twitter, her speech wasn't allowed.
No, you're absolutely right. And we know that it's happening. And Mr. Zuckerberg did not comport himself in a very honest and truthful manner. You know, when I think about, you know, and conduct my own little assessment, after action assessment, he was very well rehearsed and very well trained in, you know, how he would respond. But he was not forthcoming with anything. I think that there were about 30 to 35 different points where he said, my people will get back with you. And so that was kind of like the Heisman, man. You know, he just kept stiff-arming everybody. But, again, that's the big concern. And so when you know that they just made that determination on Diamond and Silk that they're unsafe for the community, well, first of all, what is unsafe about two black female conservatives? And to which community are they being unsafe to? And so we need to know, who are these people that are sitting back making these determinations? Who are the people, as Jonathan said, what is the trigger word, you know, in an algorithm that pops up and this is determined to be hate speech or whatever? Is it just saying America? Is it saying liberty? Is it saying freedom? So that is something that is very disconcerting for me.
Let's take some phone calls along the way, and we'll head out to California first. KNLB. And Kathy, what's your point of view?
Yes, I was wondering, how does the freedom of information play into this with the First Amendment? Because that would take in the freedom of the press and the freedom of speech. Who determines what is permissible to be informative to people that may not be aware of, or their opinion? How did they determine your freedom of information?
Well, the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, is really something that is used toward government agencies so that we have complete transparency. And one of the organizations has been very forthcoming, very successful with their prosecution of FOIA requests is Judicial Watch up in Washington, D.C. But it's very difficult when you have, you know, Mark Zuckerberg will tell you that I'm a private company. But the thing about him being a private company is that he's also in the public sphere. And so when you are out there serving the public, if you're not being very, very transparent, and so one of the things that we were talking about on the air, then we need to hold them accountable. We need to stop using that product, and then he'll get the message.
You know, Ted Cruz asked, do you consider yourself a neutral public forum? And as we talked about last hour with Chelsey, Youman, okay, that would be like a park or like a sidewalk where there's total freedom. And so if you're a public forum, then you're just a platform, just providing that information. But sometimes, Jonathan, they pretend to be a public forum and a platform. And then sometimes they almost pretend to be a news operation like CNN or CNBC or ABC or something like that, where they decide what can or cannot air. I think the first question is Facebook needs to tell us, are you or are you not? Because that's going to make a difference in terms of some of the legal issues, don't you think?
Yeah, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of kind of ground that they're crossing here. But, you know, I think like what Alan said, at the end of the day, we give them the power because we put the money in their pockets, and platforms like Facebook and YouTube and Google, they make the most money on advertising. And so there's plenty of things that we can do to, make them notice that we don't like this. And it's just like if you stop buying a product at Walmart, they will take it off the shelf. And there are things to do outside of just like deleting the app as well that, you can do to really send a message to Facebook.
Yeah, I would think so. Let me get into the hate speech issue because that's the theme, really, of this article by Allen West. Let me encourage you to read it and certainly take the time to maybe even pass it on to some others. I'll give you the quote from Ben Sass. You know, we love Ben Sass, a Republican from Nebraska, was on this program when he was just running for office. Matter of fact, he roomed with the son of one of my friends at the ministry when they were at Harvard. That goes back many, many years. But anyway, Ben Sass said, Facebook may decide it needs to police a whole bunch of speech that I think America might be better off not having policed by one company that has a really big and powerful platform. Can you define hate speech? I didn't feel like Mark Zuckerberg was ready to answer that question.
No, he was not ready to answer that question, and you can always tell because his eyes get a little bit bigger. But that's the key thing. You know, we can sit back and say we don't want Islamic jihadism out there, and we don't want, you know, videos and you know, professions of, you know, going out and killing people. But if you're a person that is saying, you know, I would rather see less government intrusion, less taxes, I believe in the Second Amendment, if you have some code out there and some algorithm buried deep that triggers that to be a hate speech, then we're moving away from understanding what freedom of speech and freedom of expression is. Look, I'll be the first one to tell you, I don't like to see people burn the American flag. No. But someone in the Supreme Court decided that that was part of their freedom of expression. So I guess I have to just sit back and understand it. But, you know, this is the danger of it. When you have a company, an organization that really does have a monopoly. I think that was something that one of the senators asked. Who is your competition out there? They went out and bought up Instagram, so they have that space as well. So if there really is not any competition, what does the public do? I mean, if the only thing you have out there is Burger King, you know, how can you know, what do you do if
no
you
alternatives?
Want no alternatives? And so,
good point.
Yeah.
Well, and again, let's look at the area of censorship, and then after the break, I want to get into some of those. But just as we're going to a break, let's talk about that. Facebook, for example, shut down the Chick-fil-A appreciation page. Okay, that is a former governor, Mike Huckabee, and a presidential candidate. You then have Fox News reporter Todd Starnes. They've closed him down on more than one occasion. You have about 24 Catholic pages that I can identify that have been closed down. We mentioned Diamond and Silk. That's just on Facebook. Then let's go over here to, of course, we just mentioned the Twitter feed for Marsha Blackburn, who is a member of Congress and could be the next senator. And then you have all the sort of things that have happened with Apple. For example, Chuck Colson's Manhattan Declaration taken away from Apple. These are all pretty powerful people. So if you can do it to those individuals, what chance does the average American person who is not a member of Congress, not a former governor or presidential candidate, not one of the most popular people on Facebook, what chance do they have? So when we come back from the break, I want to go around the round table and get some comments. But you know what? I also want to open up the phone. Open line this last half hour. What do you think about some of these problems of censorship? We can talk about Facebook. We can talk about Twitter. We can talk about YouTube. By the way, we didn't mention Dennis Prager yet. We'll get to that when we come back from the break. We can mention Apple. We can mention Amazon. These are the high-tech 4 or 5, depending on how you define them, and they are pretty powerful. So what should we do about it? Love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break, and this would be a good time to visit our website to find that article and maybe even to make your pledge. We'll be right back.
One minute. Give me 1 minute here for two very important points. First, Point of View listeners have worked and prayed for a long time, and a number of cultural victories appear to be within reach. Last week was huge. Many joined the Truth Team to be the change America needs to help finish these battles. If you gave, thank you. Thank you very much. And second, if you did not step up yet, you still have a chance to do something powerful. Last week, we received a $46,000 challenge gift that doubled gifts up to the total. We ended the week just short of that goal. But the donor now agreed to a brief extension. But listen, we don't get the match until we pass the finish line. Help us complete the challenge. Visit today at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-51 5151. You can be the difference. Push us across the line. Step up now, 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, open line 1-800-351-1212. Colonel Alan West with us, Jonathan Bodnar, and we'll take some more phone calls and then get back into some of the conversation. Just joining us, we're talking about in particular Facebook, but we broadened it to the kind of the high-tech companies and what is happening there. Let's take a phone call from, in this case, Arkansas, KMTC. Michelle, thank you for joining us today.
Afternoon.
What would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, I had a comment and a question.
Sure.
I know a few people that I've known on Facebook who have put out there that they are exchanging personal emails and with some of their closer friends on Facebook that are, distant, far away, they're exchanging personal phone numbers as well to keep in touch and to get off of Facebook and away from the Facebook and the Instagram, the whole scene pretty much that's happening right now.
I'm running into more and more people saying, I'm just through with this, all the social media. And that's certainly one option. Go ahead.
Is that viable, even though it's not a social outlet, but to stay in touch with people, just getting off of Facebook and just doing things in a more personal email
you mean
or
the old school
phone.
way, just talking to people? Yeah.
Yeah, we got this Millennial Roundtable, and a millennial can't even imagine that because I keep in touch with people by texting and Facebook and maybe Instagram or Snapchat. But in the old days, you used to call people up on the phone, Jonathan, if you can believe that.
Yeah. Email, I can't remember the last personal email I sent. The majority of it is text message and, Facebook messaging. But there are quite a few other alternative platforms out there.
Let's talk about that for a minute.
And as we mentioned in the last hour, there's a platform that's trying to gain some ground that is all about not censoring any content and freedom of speech and everything, and it's called Gab. It's GAB. But unfortunately, Apple has removed their app from the App Store, and so they're more of kind of a public forum, situation with Facebook and everything. But if you want direct communication, you've got things like WhatsApp and things like that as well. And text message, one of the benefits of Facebook is just the instant updates that you get from people and without having to actually request that information directly from them. And so there's a lot of value in platforms.
Well, since people are asking about platforms, let me stay on the phone calls for another minute or two. We'll go to South Carolina this time, WLPE. And Jane, what's your question?
Hi. Thank you so much for your ministry. Really appreciate all that you're doing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm just wondering, as believers, what can we do to really develop our own social media network? How hard would that be to do?
Jonathan, any comments?
Not hard at all. You can actually, anybody can go online and purchase a script to start a social media for less than $150 and start their own. I actually know a couple of my friends that have went out and built their own social media only for their friends, their social network only for their specific friends and not. So it's more of an exclusive thing. The problem is really gaining traction and, having enough money from investors and everything to advertise that and stuff. And Facebook obviously has the name. So,
yeah. And in some respects, they can kind of force you out of the business, can't you? Just mentioned a minute ago, Gab, when Apple says, well, we're not going to help you out. It's sort of like when Microsoft years ago said, well, yeah, you can come up with your own software, but we'll make sure that we drive you into bankruptcy. And so that's back to a monopoly issue.
It is back to a monopoly.
I got a former congressman here. Talk about this.
Well, and that's one of the key things. If you remember his testimony and everyone was asking him about regulation, he kept saying, well, I would not mind if there was some regulation instituted. Of course you wouldn't, because it would only preclude those new entries into that marketplace. Because when you look at what's been happening with small community banks as opposed to the big banks in the aftermath of Dodd-Frank Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the big banks are thriving even under this uber regulation. It's the small community banks that are just being decimated because they cannot contend with all the regulations and all the regulatory, inspections and everything like this. So Facebook is at a point where they say, sure, you can regulate me. I'll be able to take care of things. I'm a multi-billion-dollar entity. So I think when you look at the free market, eventually someone's going to pop up. You don't have MySpace anymore, if I'm correct. Okay, so it's just the same as we're not in stagecoaches anymore. We're not in wagons anymore. So something's going to come about, and I believe that there are going to be a new innovation, and it may be conservative-based. When you look at the fact that Google, YouTube, Facebook, all of them, again, they are controlled by the folks on the left side.
Yeah. And again, if the Heritage Foundation or even Point of View or somebody started something like that, we would certainly give it publicity because, again, we are well aware that people are sometimes looking for alternatives.
And I just want to be clear, if you regulate, on a conservative basis or even like a bipartisan basis, if you regulate Facebook, you won't remove their ability to make money. And so you're not actually going to damage the company. Regulating them would just... it would stop them from misuse of your information. They can still target you. They can still do all of that. And so the company's still there. Their model is still there. And so that's worth noting.
Yeah. Well, and as we've talked about before, in terms of privacy and surveillance and things like that, if you're getting it for free, then you're the product, right?
Exactly.
The data is the product. And this has been taking place long before Facebook. But let me go beyond Facebook for just a minute, because one of the stories that you know probably, Alan West, so well, and that has to do with our friend Dennis Prager. He's been on the program with us a few times and producing some videos. And matter of fact, Jonathan remembers the days when we were producing a few of those videos, but then we were just kind of passed very quickly by Prager University producing these very well done videos. By the way, if you go to some of the videos that we still have, we have some of the graphics and things like that, and they cover a gamut of wonderful topics, from affirmative action to gun control to Israel and so many other topics. But the problem is that YouTube, in its inscrutable wisdom, have said some of these may be just too controversial, so we're going to restrict young people from being able to access the videos. And those are the very people that the videos were intended for.
Yeah, and once again, it's the same thing. Diamond and Silk is unsafe for the community. All of a sudden now, we have made a determination that your videos are not safe for a certain demographic. What's the evaluative criteria?
Yeah.
And that's what we need to get to. Look, I am very concerned that there's an East German Stasi type of environment that is happening in the United States of America. And we were earlier talking about, what can the average everyday person do? How much power do they have? Just remember how the IRS was weaponized against the constitutional conservative grassroots movement we call the Tea Party. So we continue to see this heavy-handed method by which we are censoring and precluding and restricting people from doing what, the First Amendment says: freedom of speech, freedom of expression, the right to petition your government for redress of grievances. Oh, well, only the grievances that we agree with can be petitioned. And so this is a very huge issue. I mean, yeah, chemical weapons attack in Syria, pretty big deal, but we are going under our own kind of chemical weapon attack here.
We had David Horowitz on the other day, who you know, and of course one of the phrases that they use so often is, if you scratch a progressive, you'll find a totalitarian that wants to come out.
Without a doubt.
And what you're finding is that for a long time, when they weren't in control, they said, we just want free speech. We just want to give you our point of view. And then as soon as they had control, we're going to prevent anybody else's point of view, which I think is also illustrative of something else in your article, and that is the fact that we are seeing so many individuals who you would think would be invited onto a college campus and should have free access, or in the case you used here, a millennial, that is Charlie Kirk, was denied from speaking at Stoneman Douglas High School. Why? Because he's an alt-right, because he's a wide-eyed, dangerous person? No, just because he's a conservative millennial. We can't even possibly allow somebody like that to speak at the high school.
And I think that is so horrible. Last week I spoke on the campus of two universities, Clemson and down at University of Texas, young Republican, young conservatives. And when you talk to these young people and what they have to go through on these college campuses, they're fighting the administrations there, they're fighting the professors there, they're fighting against their own, peers. It's not what a system of education is supposed to be. We're supposed to have the free exchange of different points of view, perspectives, opposing viewpoints, because that's how you learn. That's how you are educated. But what we see now is what I think they can't defend what they believe in. And so the best thing is to say, I want to go into my safe space, and you're not allowed to come in here. That's censorship.
I would think so. We'll take some more phone calls in just a minute, 1-800-351-1212. But again, if you'd like to read this article, very well written by Colonel Alan West, Syrian attack was troubling, but a more dangerous weapon is being unleashed on America. And we've talked about what happens on the social media platforms and even a little bit of what's happening on campus. But when we come back, he's also got another point about some on the left are allowed to say the most mean-spirited things without any repercussions. We'll talk about that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Every 4 years, Americans experience a national transition as a new executive is inaugurated. Today, Donald Trump will recite the oath of office, likely ending with the traditional declaration, "So help me God." Some question whether George Washington actually said, "So help me God," starting a tradition maintained by most of our presidents. But we do know Washington's other words. Moments after taking the oath, Washington retreated inside Federal Hall and offered his inaugural address. As he remarked, quote, "It would be peculiarly improper to omit in this first official act my fervent supplications to that almighty being who rules over the universe, who presides in the councils of nations, and whose providential aids can supply every human defect, that his benediction may consecrate to the liberties and happiness of the people of the United States." He continued, expressing his, quote, "homage to the great author of every public and private good," by reminding his audience that, quote, "no people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than the people of the United States." These are the words of the same man who would remind our nation at the end of his presidency that both religion and morality are indispensable supports of political happiness. So today, our nation joins President Trump as he implores God's help while in office. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Thank you very much, and I just love your program. It's been an inspiration to me for many years. I just want to encourage all those of you to help keep Point of View on the air. We cannot afford to allow these stations to go empty. Please support Point of View.
I just appreciate all you guys do. I mean, I learned so much, and it's amazing what you teach that I say to other people, and they look at me like, where did you hear that? So I appreciate you guys. So thank you for all you do.
You know, my husband and I take so many extra precautions to guard our children, and it is a huge effort on the part of Christian parents to do that. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
Point of View, Truth Team 360. The future is now.
Again, we encourage you to do what you can to support this ministry, and we have information at our website, pointofview.net. Click on the button that says Join Now, and we'd love to hear from you. In studio for just a few more minutes. We'll take a phone call or two in just a minute, but we're talking today with Alan West as well as Jonathan Bodnar. And Colonel Alan West, one of the other things you talk about here is the way in which individuals, interesting enough, both with the name Joy Reid and Joy Behar.
Killjoy.
Yeah, Killjoy.
That's an oxymoronic name when I think of those two.
These are two examples, and I would like you to expand on them a little bit, are allowed to say some of the most despicable kinds of things with virtually no repercussions.
None whatsoever. And I brought that up because in the aftermath of Laura Ingraham, having some of her sponsors boycott her because of this young kid from down in Parkland. But Joy Reid, after, Steve Scalise was shot up in Washington, D.C. at the Republican baseball practice, Joy Reid went on her show on a Sunday and actually justified Steve Scalise's shooting based upon his voting record. No remorse. Seriously said, you can understand why because of these votes. He's against Obamacare and whatever. And the other funny thing is that shooting, I never heard anyone come out and talk about we need to get rid of guns or the NRA because they knew that this was a far-left psycho that went out and did what he did. And so they completely dropped this thing. But for a person on a national network news station to justify the shooting of a member of Congress because of their voting record, their opposing viewpoint, and she's still on air?
Yeah.
Or Joy Behar? Think about it. Once upon a time, if you said Christianity was a mental illness, everyone in the country would come down on you. She's still there.
Yeah.
She gave this little side apology, but the fact that she would think that she could say that and get away with it, this is starting to get out of control. And really and truthfully, this is what I don't think the left understands. They're not going to have a blue wave because all of these, instances of hypocrisy and double standards, everyone is starting to pay attention to it.
And that was one of the conversations I had with a group I spoke to a few hours ago because they're wondering the same thing. And I said, when you continually overreach, when you continually offend mainstream Americans, that maybe plays well to your small group of individuals that are activists, but the rest of America is going, do they really believe that? I mean, remember the Democratic Convention when there were boos when they talked about God and boos when they talked about Israel? That doesn't help later on when you're trying to run a campaign, right?
No, it doesn't. And then the last Democratic Convention, oddly enough in Philadelphia, they actually booed and heckled a Medal of Honor recipient.
Yes.
But yet they want us to believe that they support our troops? Give me a break.
Well, let's take some more phone calls and we'll get some comments around the table. But we'll head up to North Carolina this time, WLGP. And Andrea, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Kerby, so much. I love the conflict, I guess. But I was looking at, I voted, and I was reading this thing that showed all of the legislation that had been passed by the Democrats in the last 4 to 8 years. Last 50 years, like making it look like the Republicans have never passed any legislation supporting freedom. And I read all that. I almost was persuaded to believe that. And I said, no. My comment today is God is not limited by social media. I love your program, but I get real anxious and can't breathe when it sounds like that the media is controlling everything, because I believe God could step out of that box as quick as he put the box in there, that God is not controlled or limited by social media, no matter where it is or what we're doing with it. That's my comment. Thank you so much.
Well, it's good. And if you think about this, think of the negative press that, say, even President Trump has received and how successful he's been. Think of the negative press that Christianity has received over 2 millennium. And churches are still here, Jonathan. So that's a good warning to recognize that we probably need to challenge some of our young people to do what you're doing, to get into this area of high tech, because we sort of gave away some of these platforms, didn't we?
Yeah, I think Christians, conservatives, Republicans, I think we left a lot of, we said, we're going to go and fight for principles. And then we left a lot of the newer emerging technologies and stuff out of the picture and said, oh, somebody else will do that. And somebody else did do that, Mark Zuckerberg and, Eric Schmidt with Google and, all of them. They're filling these gaps that we didn't really, and now we're coming back later and we're saying, oh, it's, it's a little too, or it's too little, too late. And, what do we do? And so I think there's plenty of ways we can step up today and things we can do today to kind of, not let this continually, move. And a lot of people have to step up in these areas.
Well, again, I want you to maybe follow his lead, and let's see if you could encourage some of these young people to get involved in computers and technology and things like that to make a difference. But, one of the things you talk about, Alan West, is these boycotts. I always thought that Starbucks was a progressive institution, and now the liberals are wanting to boycott them, so much so that if you want to go get your Starbucks coffee on May 29th, you'll have to do it in the morning because they're going to actually close down all the stores for re-education. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, re-education, But think about it. I mean, really, if you're a student and understand history, the Democrat Party has always been a party against civil rights. They did not support the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments. They are the party of Jim Crow, segregation, lynchings. Even the civil rights legislation that was passed in 1964 was Senate Republicans, Everett Dirksen. It wasn't Al Gore Sr. and Robert Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard Byrd, who everyone seemed to praise. You look at today how the Democrats are so, in love and have this affinity for Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood was started by white supremacists and racists who, spoke at Klan rallies. So I think that we're really starting to understand and peel the onion back. Like you say, when you scratch this liberal progressive, you see a little totalitarian under there. Well, you also see the true racists.
Yeah, that's just fascinating. Again, if people want to contact you, I think you're reworking your website, but we'll give that as soon as it's available.
Alan West on Facebook, and then also on Twitter. But I do have a podcast called Old School Patriot.
That's right.
So check that out.
And we do have those links here. Let me just mention that next to both Jonathan as well as Chelsey, and of course Colonel West, we have the links to the Twitter and Facebook pages and other contact points. So if you would like to talk to them, I know they'd love to hear from you. Thank you both for being here.
Our pleasure.
A different Millennial Roundtable. I'm sure Nick Pitts will be here next week, but I'm looking forward to a great conversation tomorrow. And then Friday we'll have Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews will be around the roundtable. So again, you can find out all about what we are talking about on our website. We certainly do encourage you to find a few of these articles we've posted today. And if you can click on that button that says Join Now, that's a way in which you can join the Truth Team. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. That's all for today here on Point of View. See you back here tomorrow.
One minute. Give me 1 minute here for two very important points. First, Point of View listeners have worked and prayed for a long time, and a number of cultural victories appear to be within reach. Last week was huge. Many joined the Truth Team to be the change America needs to help finish these battles. If you gave, thank you. Thank you very much. And second, if you did not step up yet, you still have a chance to do something powerful. Last week, we received a $46,000 challenge gift that doubled gifts up to the total. We ended the week just short of that goal. But the donor now agreed to a brief extension. But listen, we don't get the match until we pass the finish line. Help us complete the challenge. Visit today at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. You can be the difference. Push us across the line. Step up now. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing.